The following program is being brought to you on the Voice America Business Channel. For more information about our network and to check our additional show hosts and topics of interest, please visit voiceamericabusiness.com. The Voice America Talk Radio Network is the worldwide leader in live Internet talk radio. Visit voiceamerica.com. The views and ideas expressed on the following program are strictly those of the host or guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by the Voice America Talk Radio Network, its staff, and management.
Welcome to GlobeTalk with Avasant. Avasant is a next-generation global consulting firm that has its finger on the pulse of the global economy. Join us for an exciting look at the world economy. Now, here is your host, Kevin Parikh.
Welcome to GlobeTalk with Avasant. I'm your host, Trent Johnson. I'll be sitting in for Kevin Parikh this week. Kevin will be back, however, for next week's broadcast. On today's show, we'll tackle two topics that relate to technology services at the local government level. First, we'll discuss the impact of the budget crisis on outsourcing, specific to state and local governments in the U.S. And in our second half, we'll take a journey to the North Pole to see how Canada's largest and youngest province, Nunavut, is looking to make technological advances as a means to drive productivity and savings. As we know, it's political season here in the U.S., and over the past few weeks leading up to November 2nd elections, millions are going to cast their votes for members of the U.S. Congress, state and local offices, as well as ballot initiatives. As a backdrop for this coming election is the global recession and the subsequent slow recovery, which began back in mid-2008. The impact on state and local governments has been significant. We only have to pick up a newspaper to hear headlines such as budgets impacted by financial crisis, government services are being cut, taxes and government fees are rising. With jobs and money scarce, every interest group is vying to ensure that they can claim their share of the limited amount of public funds now available. As examples, here in California, voters are going to consider ballot measures in the coming election, such as a repeal of certain business tax benefits or even the restriction of the legislature from being able to reserve or divert funds appropriated for transportation and public services. So how does outsourcing play into this lively discussion? We're seeing U.S. state and local governments looking for ways to save money in operational expenditures, given the reality of lower tax revenues and smaller budgets in this tepid economy. Many state and local governments have turned to outsourcing of technology services with the aim of reducing costs and improving efficiencies to realize savings over a period of years. Joining us to talk about this issue today is Avasant's own Ravi Mahalingam. Ravi is a general counsel for Avasant and has been involved in several state and local government initiatives, as well as negotiating and structuring several of these transactions to reduce the cost of managing technology services. Welcome to the show, Ravi.
Thank you, Trent. Good to be with you.
Great. So, Ravi, why don't you tell us, is the outsourcing of technology services in the public sector a relatively new phenomenon?
No, some form of it has taken place in different sectors and in different countries around the world over the past several decades. If you can do any kind of research on the Internet, you'll find that countries like England and Australia, which have strived to reduce the cost of healthcare to their citizens, have relied on outsourcing and investigated technology outsourcing in particular to try to reduce those costs and have achieved some measure of success. It is, generally speaking, technology outsourcing is a part of how large and growing organizations, including governments, adapt to changing economic times, and how they become more efficient and focus their resources on what they do best. And outsourcing is obviously a politically charged term in our daily discourse, but all it really means is contracting out of services to third parties. It involves turning over non-core functions. That means that turning over the things that government doesn't really specialize in and handing it off to companies that do, with the hope and benefit that you will get the advantage of technological efficiencies, better skill sets, and lower costs. In the world of public sector transactions, the term more commonly used has been privatization, which incorporates outsourcing in part, including some additional points. But privatization inherently involves divestitures, contracting services to third parties, and those are things that we identify with outsourcing today.
Well, privatization surely is a term that I think we've heard a lot, and maybe it's the more politically sensitive term. But because privatization has been around as long as it has, does that mean that a lot of the technology services that we're currently considering for outsourcing today have been outsourced or privatized previously?
Yes, and again, technology outsourcing is relatively young compared to other types of services like copy services and things like that. Technology sourcing is probably about 2.5 decades old. But if you look at, if you read headlines today and look at what types of services are being outsourced today, in many cases, these are in fact standard IT services that were outsourced previously, so they're effectively being resourced. In our own experience at Avasant, state and local governments in California, where our company is headquartered, like the County of Orange or the City of San Diego, are in current contracts with either private IT outsourcing firms or, in the case of the City of San Diego, a nonprofit entity that was created some 20, 30 years ago specifically to provide IT services to other city customers. Many of these contracts are between 5 and 15 years old, and it is imperative that as these contracts expire or need to be renewed, that technology services needs to be reconsidered in terms of what has been going on in innovation, what advances have happened, what are the budget constraints that cities and local governments face today, and essentially the whole plan needs to be revisited and remade for the future.
So you mentioned that these are typical IT services that we would see. What are, for our listeners, what are the types of services that you would see, outsourced in the public sector in a typical transaction for technology services?
In some sense, it's really not that different from the kinds of things that private companies are outsourcing. We're looking at help desk and call center services, data centers, which is a big priority for state and local government, major enterprise software applications, voice networks, data networks. These areas have become effectively commodity services that can be done more efficiently by specialized IT service providers. And you'll notice in a lot of governments, like the largest group of employees or staff are often IT, or IT ranks in the top 3 or 4. But that's not what most people think that government should be doing. They think that government ought to be focusing most of its resources on the actual services that are public facing, and that is one of the reasons why there's often an impetus in any state and local government, whether they're controlled by conservative politicians or liberal politicians, to look at how can we make government run more efficiently.
I guess just as an aside, it begs the question that if we can make government run more efficiently, you will have more of those funds that are allocated and dedicated to kind of the general services that citizens would expect, police services, fire services, and whatnot. Let's change directions for a second. But, obviously this term of outsourcing is fairly politically charged, and I imagine even more so in the public domain. But what is the typical process that you would expect to see in any type of a public sector outsourcing initiative?
Well, the first step is really to identify the scope of services that you think can be outsourced. So, for example, in some cases you might decide to outsource your call center or your phone network, as was the case in the County of Orange. You might decide to start small, and then what you have to do is you have to obtain approval from your governing body. In a county, it might be the County Board of Supervisors. In a city, it might be the City Council. And so at each stage of the process, the elected officials have oversight. They either do it actively or they reserve the right to intervene. So once you get that approval, you have the opportunity as a state IT department to then undertake a preliminary strategy or review, and that is where our company, Avasant, is usually involved, and we come in to do a review, and our reviews are essentially based on doing a total cost of ownership analysis between what the cost of services is today versus what someone else in the private sector might be able to provide. Once that strategy document is developed, it then has to be presented before the elected board, whether it's the City Council or County Board of Supervisors or the other analogous governing authority. And then they will sign off on whether to go ahead with a competitive bidding process. Now, all state and local government, when you procure services, there are very strict requirements on making the competitive process open and fair and allow all qualified bidders to bid. So that is a lengthy process. It's a process that requires a lot of effort, maybe, and it's not a process that can be shortcut or short-circuited, as may be the case in when a private company is doing that. So once that is finally complete, you narrow down the vendors, the competitive bids, and you eventually select a final bid. And once you do that, you have to negotiate a contract with that vendor. And again, at any time, the county board, city councils, or other analogous governing bodies can have oversight and can interject themselves into the process. And on top of that, year to year, the budgetary situations of governments change, so they may or may not have the money to actually fund the project after you go through all this process. So it is a long, arduous process that is probably less efficient than it could be done in the private sector, but nonetheless is being done all over the country.
You know, I imagine it has to be. The amount of scrutiny, it sounds like, the media and even the citizenry would put on the government officials these days, especially in view of some of the stories of corruption that we hear, are probably necessary. Well, I'll tell you what, Ravi, we're going to take a small commercial break, and we'll pick up on our discussion of outsourcing in the public sector as a means to tighten our budgetary belts. We'll be back in a moment.
When it comes to business, you'll find the experts here. Voice America Business Network. Are you ready to grow your business? Listen for the Independent Business Owner Show with your coach, Rick Corrado. This entertaining talk radio program will bring you the tools to help increase your business. You'll learn sales success, time management, lead generation, business development, life balance, and much more. Rick Corrado is here to help you take your business to the next level. Listen for the Independent Business Owner Show, heard live every Monday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. Pacific on the Voice America Business Network.
Avasant, your management consulting firm for the next generation, providing sourcing advisory, globalization, and go-to-market strategies. In an unpredictable world, Avasant is your trusted global advisor. Learn more about us. Go to www.avasant.com. That's AVASANT.com.
Source, providing global sourcing solutions for IT and business process services. We offer call center sales and support services at the highest industry standards. Cape Source, world-class IT services straight from the heart of Africa. Learn more about us on the web at www.capesource.org.
Tune Tune in to It's Your Money with host Bill Pfeifferlich. You'll get an eye-opening education about some of the misconceptions of the financial world. If you are a business owner, working professional, or successful American, you will benefit from the information on our program. Our guests will include financial service professionals, international tax and estate attorneys, and CPAs. We'll identify solutions that you can implement now to get the most of your money. Tune in Tuesdays at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time for It's Your Money on Voice America Business.
When it comes to business, you'll find the experts here. Voice America Business Network.
Listening to GlobeTalk with Avasant. We're here to answer your questions about the global economy. Please send an email to globetalk@avasant.com. That's globetalk at Avasant, AVASANT.com. Now, back to our program. Here's Kevin Parikh.
Hi, this is Trent Johnson again, sitting in this week for Kevin Parikh, who will be back on next week's show. We're back to the show with Ravi Mahalingam of Avasant. Today we've been discussing the role of outsourcing in the public sector. In the last segment, we got a pretty good appreciation for the history and the scope of outsourcing and the types of services that are outsourced in the public domain. But in the news these days, we hear a lot about the politics, especially the jobs as they are associated with outsourcing. Ravi, how sensitive do we find the politics are regarding outsourcing today?
Well, it's very sensitive. It's the process of doing public sector outsourcing runs into several political roadblocks. There are conflicting demands from several different interest groups. Among them would be labor unions, probably the most prominent group who often raise objections to any kind of outsourcing. And also elected officials who either philosophically don't support outsourcing or are concerned about the damage done to their own standing in the public, especially if offshore outsourcing is on the table, and also officials who don't honestly believe that the business case has effectively been made or convincingly been made to do outsourcing. But nonetheless, there's the pull on that side against outsourcing. Yet, nonetheless, we still have a push for outsourcing in nearly every state in the country. And why is that? Well, there's a lack of desire to raise taxes. Yet, there is increasing demand for more government services and to have those services delivered efficiently. So the money has to come from somewhere, and outsourcing is a way to free up money to be able to provide more government services at effectively a lower cost. Another big concern is essentially employment concerns, which, again, is where labor unions often step in. But it's not limited to them. The government is the biggest employer in many regions and also creates additional jobs that maybe are not directly related to a government contract, but indirectly related to a government contract. So anytime you see a headline where, say, 50 jobs that were in County X are going to be outsourced, people wonder, well, how many additional jobs that were tied to those 50 jobs are also going to be impacted? And as I mentioned earlier, offshoring, which is the term used in the technology services industry to describe services which are being performed in developing countries like India or China. Those create great political peril for many politicians, and there are, in fact, several laws which have been enacted across state and local governments to restrict or complicate offshoring as an option.
Ravi, in describing it, you almost hit several drivers that are competing in and of themselves. Obviously the trade-off between increasing demand for government services while keeping taxes lower, while recognizing that the government is underlying it all is one of the largest net suppliers of jobs. It makes for a very volatile, to say the least, discussion to be had. As an adjunct to that, I know that there are often, at least in some of these competitions for getting these large government contracts, there's often discussions of collusion and incumbent blocking the ability to compete these things fairly. You mentioned earlier as part of the process that there's a competitive bidding process. Does that allow incumbents or the current providers of services to continue to provide these services or to bid? How does that help make the political landscape a little more palatable?
Well, you're correct that the competitive bidding process has to be open essentially to all qualified and capable providers. So that would include the incumbent provider. In many cases, is already an outsourced provider, but has been entrenched so long with the account that they are basically seen as another arm of the government. So yes, there's to bid, and others are allowed to bid who are private sector companies. And that is true that under the laws of most jurisdictions, all qualified competitors, including incumbent providers, and private companies that have no connection to the government, have a fair chance to compete. And outsourcing is most effective when it is backed by sound comparative analysis using a total cost of ownership model, which is something that we do at Avasant quite often. What that means is it's just comparing the current cost of the services provided today versus what a third-party provider, a private sector company, for example, could provide currently and over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, or whatever the term of the agreement is expected to be. Doing that sort of comparison underscores the cost savings aspects and places the emphasis on the overall savings to the public and taxpayers and less on the individual jobs that might be displaced. In many cases, you might actually be creating more jobs in the private sector because you can reduce the cost that the government pays, and yet the private sector company can hire the same number of people at a lower cost and maybe have to hire more people in order to scale up to meet growing demand.
Well, so, obviously the economics of the deal, it sounds like makes significant sense. I know definitely in the private sector, regardless of the, at times, negative reputation a lot of corporations get around outsourcing, they still continue to do so. Largely, the storyline that you hear is going to be to remain competitive on the global landscape. Those things aside, do we find that the politics or the sensitivity around the politics are a showstopper? Have they been an impediment to municipal governments from considering outsourcing as a viable option?
Well, the short answer to that is no. In spite of all of the competing interests that some are strongly and passionately weighed against outsourcing. In fact, even countries like England, Australia, and Canada, all of which have much more extensive labor-friendly laws and social welfare systems, have actually continued to innovate in this area. The reason is that current political realities require more efficient delivery of services because tax rates and tax revenues in most cases are not going up, or if they are going up, it's not enough to meet the demand or the cost of delivering service. Ultimately, in many cases, the overall demands of the public outweigh the demands of individual interest groups.
So, in effect, what you're suggesting is that as a net provider of jobs, the government can no longer provide those jobs as a loss leader, and they're still held to the same kind of efficiencies and productivity gains that the private sector has to be held to, in effect.
That is correct, and a big reason for that is most state and local governments, they get their revenues from various sales taxes, which and the revenues you collect from sales taxes go up or down based on the boom and bust cycle of the economy, and so many governments don't have effective rainy day funds to be able to withstand downward pressures in the economy. And so when money is scarce and yet demand for services is high, the money has to come from somewhere, and technology sourcing has been one of the top 3 or 4 areas that almost every government has taken a look at.
Okay. So one of the things that we hear a lot more as we consider outsourcing, definitely in the larger scheme, is this notion of BPO, or business process outsourcing. If we took a look at that newer trend, how we hear it being adopted in Europe and Australia, and just on the fringes in the U.S. around things like HR services such as payroll and benefits. In the public sector, are you hearing, or in your experience, are BPO services more easy to outsource than IT services?
Actually, from a political standpoint, the data that we've been able to gather suggests that it is, in fact, somewhat easier to outsource business process services rather than traditional IT services. For example, HR and what's commonly associated with HR services would be things like payroll and benefits. Those areas are often understaffed at the government level. And the benefits requirements for government employees, especially unionized employees, are often very complicated, and especially because pensions draw on these same benefits, for example. So there's more consensus among these interest groups on the need to achieve efficiencies, improve technology, and meet demand. And so, in a sense, when you're doing BPO, in the examples that we've been able to see, it's been somewhat more like staff augmentation, where you're adding to current staff. And if the local government doesn't have the capability in-house to manage it, it becomes more of a full outsourcing. In short, there are just not that many jobs at risk in the examples that we've seen on the BPO side as opposed to the IT side, where there are often a number of people who are earning good government salaries and getting solid benefits and earning a good standard of living, and many of those jobs maybe transition to third-party providers.
So inevitably, it sounds like what the byline is that it all comes down to numbers, the number of jobs, and it sounds like the BPO option seems to have less jobs at risk as opposed to a more IT-centric transaction. So I guess, Ravi, the big question then is, as it pertains to the public sector and especially this concept of outsourcing, is this a trend that's here to stay?
I believe it is, and I think it is so deeply entrenched that rather than talking about whether one should outsource or should not outsource, I think the discussion should move towards how do you manage outsourcing in a way to achieve the objectives that governments have. And the objectives are really save money, avoiding large capital outlays. For example, technology tools and processes that are required to refresh current systems today are things that most public sector organizations cannot afford to build internally. And in that sense, outsourcing is a very cost-effective way to improve one's technological capabilities, especially now as we're entering the decade of the cloud. Cloud computing is going to substantially accelerate the attractive of outsourcing to everybody.
Awesome. Well, Ravi, first of all, thank you so much for your insightful comments. I've gained a lot. I'd like to thank you for joining us today. When we return, we'll be joined by Amit Singh, a partner at Avasant. Amit will be giving us some on-the-ground insights from a government client in the Arctic Circle who's embarked on a transaction like we've talked about today. Stay tuned. We'll be back after these messages from our sponsors.
From the boardroom to you, Voice America Business Network.
Go inside the world of PR with PR Insider, hosted by public relations expert Maureen Kettis. Maureen will speak to the world's highest profile PR pros from the fields of marketing, advertising, and sales. And PR Insider will feature renowned members of the media as special guests. Maureen will give you a VIP access pass, including tips and tricks to take your business to the next level. PR Insider with Maureen Kettis, sponsored by Cision, us.cision.com. Listen every Friday at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern Time on the Voice America Business Network.
CapeSource, providing global sourcing solutions for IT and business process services. We offer call center sales and support services at the highest industry standards. CapeSource, world-class IT services straight from the heart of Africa. Learn more about us on the web at www.capesource.org.
Are you looking for innovative ideas on how to achieve your financial dreams? Tune in to Empirical Investing Radio every Thursday afternoon at 2 Pacific, 5 Eastern on the Voice America Business Channel. Join certified financial planners Ken Smith and Ethan Broga to learn how you can obtain financial success. You'll be entertained while you discover techniques to alleviate your financial concerns. Empirical Investing Radio every Thursday at 2 Pacific, 5 Eastern on the Voice America Business Channel.
Avasant, your management consulting firm for the next generation, providing sourcing advisory, globalization, and go-to-market strategies. In an unpredictable world, Avasant is your trusted global advisor. Learn more about us. Go to www.avasant.com. That's AVASANT.com.
Voice America Business Network, the bottom line in business.
Listening to GlobeTalk with Avasant. We're here to answer your questions about the global economy. Please send an email to globetalk@avasant.com. That's globetalk@avasant, AVASANT.com. Now, back to our program. Here's Kevin Parikh.
Hi, and welcome back to GlobeTalk. This is Trent Johnson. I'm sitting in for Kevin Parikh this week. On today's show, we've been discussing the role of outsourcing as a means to assist with the budget constraints being felt in state and local governments. Joining us is Amit Singh. Amit is a partner at Avasant who assists clients with a broad range of outsourcing and shared services assignments. His latest adventure takes him to the top of the world. Yes, folks, the top of the world. Amit, welcome to GlobeTalk, and no doubt warmer weather.
Thank you, Trent. It's definitely nice to be back, and temperatures ranging in 80s.
Excellent. So Amit, obviously most of our audience will never have heard of the Canadian province of Nunavut, your client. Can you give us some background on its geography and history?
Happy to. I spent some time up there recently and had a lot of learning. And as you rightly said, a lot of folks would never have imagined about this largest province in Canada, which is very interesting because Nunavut, which really in Inuit language means our land, spans more than 2 million square kilometers of the Canadian Arctic. It extends from the North Atlantic Ocean, Hudson Strait and Davis Strait, in the east, across 3 time zones to the west and north.
Wow, it sounds like you're getting quite the education up in Nunavut.
It is big, Trent. And by the way, both the magnetic as well as the geographic North Pole are in Nunavut.
You are clearly learning your fair share about Nunavut. So, what can you give me a little bit of background about the environmental significance of a place like Nunavut?
Absolutely. So Nunavut is home to some of the largest Inuit settlements up in the north. And this place is obviously very, very cut off from the rest of the world. The closest flight that I took was from Ottawa, and it was 3.5 hours over some of, I would say, the most pretty scenery that I've ever seen. And then over Hudson Strait to go to land in the capital city of Iqaluit, population 6,000 people. It is the largest town in the entire province. I told you that it's about 2 million square kilometers, and the total population of the province is less than 29,000. There are about 25 communities in the territory, populations between 150 to 6,000 and 7,000. Iqaluit being the largest by far.
So 29,000. So by comparison, just for our listeners, a U.S. city the size of New Orleans, let's say pre-Katrina, was about 450,000 people. So it's fairly small in terms of population density.
Absolutely. And the only way that you have to go from point A to point B, which is, from one community to the other one, in the modern time, at least for someone like me, who is not very used to, traveling by dog sled, is through air. And that is how most of the people that travel now. It was very interesting to see that in such a very diverse place, and I'll explain later what I mean by diverse. Here, people were traveling. There were 4 airlines operating, ferrying people as well as goods between these very remote places, including fuel for generators and so on. A very interesting juxtaposition of old cultural values, the way people used to live off the land, and both the opportunities and challenges that these modern times have bring in.
Well, I got to tell you, Amit, the location that you're describing clearly doesn't sound like any place that we would think of when we think of the cutting edge of technology and technological advances. One of the things I guess that we wanted to highlight on the show is that your client is obviously one of these public sector clients, if you will, that are looking at leveraging outsourcing, basically to meet budgetary constraints in this day and age. From a IT perspective or a telecom perspective, are there any unique environmental challenges to place in a location like Nunavut?
Yeah, so let me step back a little bit here. The work that we are doing right now is looking at the entire information and communication technology strategy for the whole province. The government of Nunavut is our client, and the objective is to look at how both business as well as governance of such far-flung communities can be more effectively managed using information and communication technology. Outsourcing may or may not play any part in it. That is yet to be seen. But really, what is interesting is to see how technology can change so many lives, and additionally also help us measure the impact of the environmental challenges that you talked about, such as global warming, face it very directly and staring across at you in every which way possible. In a couple of weeks that I spent up there, it became very, very apparent that this is where the next frontier for both our environmental battles as well as the newly discovered, I would say, minerals and riches that lie below the polar ice cap are being not only researched and discovered, but also there's a race, if I could say so, of getting to them between various countries. Russia is making their own inroads into their regions, and so is Canada. So is Denmark, and so on.
Oh, I can imagine. I for the first time, I actually used Google Earth to see where Nunavut is on the map, and it's a stone's throw away from Greenland almost.
Yes, in winters you could, in severe winters, you could actually take a snowmobile and go across to Greenland. It is but a couple of hours away.
Oh, that's awesome. So, so to recharacterize what the government of Nunavut is trying to do is put together some kind of an information, communication, and technology plan of sorts. Do they have specific objectives that they are looking, as you describe this environment and how the population density is and some of the initiatives that they're trying to do with the minerals and local resources? Do they have specific objectives that they're trying to accomplish, that they may have published to a firm like Avasant that Avasant's trying to enable?
Absolutely. Nunavut is arguably the youngest province in Canada. They became a province in 1999, so they're only about 11 years old. And the guiding philosophy that comes down from the legislature is something that they call tamapta in the local language called Inuktitut, the language of the Inuit. And tamapta really focuses on, in a nutshell, on sustainable living being and staying self-reliant as they always have had. And at the same time, gaining from the technology, gaining from the modern opportunities to not only become healthier, but also contribute and be recognized in Canada as well as globally for their unique culture and for their way of life. So, with that, the interesting objectives that the government set out for governance, is they have about 13, 14 departments, many of them client-facing, such as land acquisition, such as housing, such as Indian affairs and affairs of the youth, cultural programs, and so on. And then there are those related to mining and how to work with the land and still get valuable resources from the land. Research for them, such as looking across for the other mobile resources such as caribou herds. Very interesting phenomenon that used to actually show how life used to be lived up there. So for meeting business objectives of these departments, in a place where you really cannot use a lot of paper and pencil, if you will, a lot of face-to-face meetings. It's hard to travel. One has to rely to a much larger degree on technology to identify objectives that these departments need to meet, and then to find out ways and means of measuring their success. Nunavut is about 80 or 90% supported by the federal government of Canada. And there is interest from both the federal government as well as from the government of Nunavut to establish an ICT plan that lays out areas for investment in the next 4 or 5 years that allow those departments to measure these goals on an ongoing basis, both from a financial perspective as well as success and the relative success of various programs.
So if I appreciate what Avasant's role is in terms of helping the government of Nunavut put together a strategic plan, it's basically how to, in the coming years, assign these investments?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, and and it's very, very unique, Trent. I have, as you sort of put it in the introduction for me, I've been doing ICT strategy work for corporations as well as public sector clients, across the United States, both local as well as state governments. State of California has been a client of mine for many years. But the challenges that you face, as well as the metrics that you would think about, putting in for IT planning is very, very unique. I'll give you an example, a very interesting example. They have a project in there by a department which really is all about looking at the elders in the community and mapping out all the knowledge that they have carried for generations in their heads. So this was an orals-only, community. People would pass down knowledge about the weather, about the herds, about survival, about a lot of things, just from father to son or daughter, constantly. And only now have they started mapping this out in databases. You're talking about millions of square miles of territory here.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I will tell you what, it sounds like the work that you all are doing are having far-reaching and almost historical implications on where this community and culture goes from here. I'll tell you what, the assignment sounds intriguing. What we'd like to do maybe is, after a break from our sponsors, we can pick up on our discussion of the outsourcing in the public sector, and in this case, the strategic planning and how information technology happening in the real-world example of Nunavut with Amit Singh. We'll be back in a moment, folks.
Business community's first choice in Internet Talk Radio. Voice America Business Network.
Avasant, your management consulting firm for the next generation, providing sourcing advisory, globalization, go-to-market strategies. In an unpredictable world, Avasant is your trusted global advisor. Learn more about us. Go to www.avasant.com. That's AVASANT.com.
Are you thinking about starting a nonprofit? Or perhaps you've already started one and want ideas, inspiration, and encouragement? Tune in to Nonprofit Spark with your host, Renee McGivern. Our program will feature as guests the leaders of emerging nonprofits who will share what works for them. We also will hear from experts who offer advice to make your jobs easier. Tune in to Nonprofit Spark, and together we'll create a world that works for everyone. Nonprofit Spark airs live Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific on the Voice America Business Channel.
Cape Source, providing global sourcing solutions for IT and business process services. We offer call center sales and support services at the highest industry standards. Cape Source, world-class IT services straight from the heart of Africa. Learn more about us on the web at www.capesource.org.
When it comes to business, you'll find the experts here. Voice America Business Network.
You are listening to GlobeTalk with Avasant. We're here to answer your questions about the global economy. Please send an email to globetalk@avasant.com. That's globetalk@avasant, AVASANT.com. Now, back to our program. Here's Kevin Parikh.
Hi, this is Trent Johnson sitting in for Kevin Parikh on this week's session on Globe Talk. We're back with Amit Singh of Avasant. Today, Amit has been sharing a real-world example of strategy in the public sector around information technology and communications with his client in Nunavut, Canada. Amit, in the last section, we described the overall work that you've been doing and the objectives at Nunavut. If we could turn for a minute to specifically some of the, or how a firm like an Avasant works with a client like Nunavut to help them develop a strategy. I know consulting firms tend to be very process-oriented. How is Avasant working with the government of Nunavut to develop their corporate ICT plan?
Good question, Trent. Really, in terms of the way a consulting firm goes about developing any planning exercises, first of all, to immerse themselves into the business side. ICT is but an enabler. You have to understand what are the governance priorities of the government, so of the ultimate client, which is the people. What are the really not only the priorities, objectives, as well as what is it that is holding them back, and you identify those common shared goals of governance by various client-facing departments. That's the first thing you got to understand. And then you got to take that and see how IT is enabling, those functions today. It not only includes back office functions such as, looking at budgeting, moves of money as well as move of services, tracking, those enterprise, if I could call them enterprise functions, but also about issues that affect people in their daily lives. And how to track and monitor those. And so you got to take that and then, see if there is a gap between IT's current capabilities to support these departments and where they want to go in next 3, 4, 5 years. And do this gap analysis, come up with recommendations in terms of where should new investments be made. Should you retire some of the existing IT? Do you have too many legacy applications out here? Are you following an architecture which is sustainable, which is scalable? Do you have adequate disaster recovery capabilities? And even more importantly these days, is all the information and data secure? Is it private enough? Are you following all the compliance requirements of your state and so on? You got to put all of those factors sort of, in a blender, and out comes the ICT plan.
So let me ask you a question. I mean, obviously, you said you've worked in both public sector and private clients. It sounds like across the number of departments that you have, you're going to have, various stakeholders. Do you find in public sector work especially because there's an underpinning of politics, if you will, that there is any more or less difficulty in driving consensus among your various stakeholders?
Well, there's definitely a difference, and it is not only because of the political motive. It is also because the motives of a government and the motives of a for-profit corporation are quite different, and that is reflected in their organizational hierarchy. In a corporate world, the measurements, the controls are far tighter than most of the governments that I have seen. It's much easier to hide in a government, if you will. And because of that reason, we keep on hearing about waste in Sacramento, waste in Washington, waste in Ottawa, everywhere, waste in India, and so on. So I think there's a key difference, and because of that, it becomes even more challenging for a consultant to work with a government and look at all these various stakeholders and try to build some sort of consensus, especially in a place where they don't necessarily have to come together. There is nobody at the top telling them come together or else. There is no dominant voice, and I think that really becomes, I would say, the biggest challenge, even more than the political motivations.
Well, so to take a step back then, Amit, if in such a decentralized environment, which doesn't sound to be as command and control as some types of business that we would see, who are the groups that have a political interest in the project, and are they more or less aligned to support, I guess, the top-down government of Nunavut type objectives?
Nunavut has been a very pleasant experience in that. It is relatively a young province, and the good thing that they've done is they've hired extensively from the private sector. The CIO that we work with, Peter Barrell, is an exceptionally smart and very well experienced person. The Deputy Minister of CGS that we are working for, Kathleen Kaufman, she comes from the private sector, and we have been able to keep a pretty good pace in terms of meeting with various people, understanding their requirements, their views of IT, their challenges and constraints and frustrations. And that's really what we have been focusing on collecting in the past few visits that we've been up there.
So ultimately, is the plan to drive local employment from this initiative, or will it leverage technology solutions as the primary outcome that's hoped here? Absolutely.
Well, if I could, I would push the biggest investments towards identifying something very, very unlikely, Trent, a piece of caribou poop. And you laugh, but obviously I'm saying this in a lighter note. But such is the difference in creating a plan for a state like California or Louisiana versus going out to the polar Arctic regions where the style of life is completely different. People were for years, and giving it as an example, for years were trying to ascertain where the caribou herds are, and they are instrumental to the local surviving of the land, policy of the Inuit people. It's really caribou and seal and narwhal that govern where these settlements will stay. Is this a good time, or is this going to be a bad year? And recently, the researchers started saying, "Hey, we need to, how do we find out where are the roots of these caribou herds? You can't just track them using planes. You can't track them only by using RFID because things get lost. And even if the signals can be sent, the Arctic blizzards all over, it's very easy to lose, that. So they came down to something very low technology. They said, every hunter that goes and shoots things in the wilderness, bring back a piece of caribou poop. And I think it is, I believe, a few dollars, and if I'm not mistaken, $5 or $10, $25 per piece of poop.
Absolutely. Well, I got to tell you, Avasant has taken new bounds in terms of what we'll do for our clients.
Absolutely, and it was very interesting to find because that's their source then of finding out where the animals have been and so on. So that was a very eye-opener thing.
Sorry,
and I think
as compelling as the story is,
are I would say, really having some very nice new experiences in what kind of technology strategies need to be up there.
Great. Amit, we're running out of time, but as compelling as the story is, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. It's been an informative hour today on the benefits of both outsourcing and technology strategy in the public sector. We'd like to thank both of our guests, Ravi Mahalingam, General Counsel of Avasant, and Amit Singh, a partner in the state and local government practice. Kevin Parikh will join us for next week's show. Until then, thank you for joining us on GlobeTalk with Avasant.
We hope you enjoyed Globe Talk with Avasant for this week. We'll be here again next Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, noon Pacific, on the Voice America Business Channel. Please join your host, Kevin Parikh,